If you come across older books like this guy right here, now the Lyman Gunsight Corporation is what we now know as just Lyman with a lot of their reloading stuff. And this particular book, number 38, was published in 1951. And some of these books, not only are they worth snapping up because you've got history, you've got the products that were made, they would also show you what to do with them, how to use them, and they give you tips, insights, tricks. A very concise book that would show you a whole bunch more stuff and information in one small package, and it's just simply not done that way anymore. So if nothing else, they're cool to snap up just to look through them. If you do any kind of marketing or if you have a business and you're trying to figure out what's a good way to present what it is you're selling to the general public and put the information out there in one format that's going to say, here's what we sell, here's what you do with it, here's how to do what you do with it, here are the applications. They covered all their bases. These people really thought through everything they were doing. And this was at a time when, you didn't have the modern conveniences that we have now. A lot of people were more self-reliant on their own ability to do what it is that they're going to do, particularly when it came to the guns and the shooting and the reloading. This was in large measure how you fed your family. So you've got a garden, you hunt, you fish, right? That's how you feed your family. It wasn't like there wasn't a lot of grocery stores out there, particularly in the bigger cities. But when you got into the countryside, you just didn't have a lot of the availability of some of the product that you have these days. Now, one of the fellas, after you get past the first part of the book, they're going to talk about here, Keith. There's going to be Keith style bullets. So in the first part of the book, it's going to take you through casting, all the equipment that's used, how you alloy your lead, all that type of thing. And then when you get into some of the projectiles, it starts with a rifle and then it's going to get into the handgun stuff. Now, revolvers used to be a lot more popular than they are now, and it's an extraordinarily versatile tool. You can target shoot with it, you can hunt with it, you can defend yourself with it. It's very portable. There's just a lot going for a revolver. Plus the reliability of it. You don't have stoppages the way you can with a semi-automatic. But there was a fellow by the name of Elmer Keith. Now, if you're not familiar with Elmer Keith, he's responsible and credited with the 44 Magnum. Dirty Harry, the 44 Mag, at that time the most powerful handgun in the world, because of this fellow right there. Now, Elmer Keith not only is credited with the 44 Magnum, but a whole bunch of other stuff. He was a very popular gun writer for a lot of gun magazines over the years. He's got a number of books. If you want to Google that, they're very worthwhile books to read. But he designed projectiles. And here's a guy in Salmon, Idaho, who would use the tools that he invented, bullets in this instance, for the purposes of hunting, for saving his own life. In one of his books, he talks about, here's a guy in Salmon, Idaho, who's out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, and part of his daily routine is he's breaking wild horses. Well, he tells a story about how he was breaking a horse, he was on it, and the thing started to throw him off, and he had his foot caught in the stirrup, and the thing took off across the field and was dragging him. Now, if you're banging your head on rocks as you're going across the field, that's going to get you dead pretty fast. So he talks about how he was able to draw. He had to kill the horse just to save his own life. Well, this is a very serious fellow about what he's doing. And he's also using his revolvers to do things like hunt to feed his family. And there's stories about him, taking deer. He's taking a buck at many hundreds of yards on several different occasions. He'd walk him in. He'd take one shot. Okay, that fell short. Hold a little higher, boom, second one, okay, and on the third one, he connects. Try shooting something at 400 yards with a 44 mag and see how fast you can hit the target. not as easy, but I digress. Here's one of the bullets he's designed. Now, this is called a Keith bullet, and there's several reasons, and we could do a whole video on just why this bullet looks the way it does. But Elmer designed this for a lot of different reasons. Now, the first part, and by the way, these are still made today. You can buy molds, so if you want to cast your own. But Missouri Bullet Company, I know, does a Keith style bullet, and there's other companies that do a Keith style bullet. Now, when I say Keith style, they don't always necessarily do the exact reproduction of how Elmer Keith designed his projectile. I want to show you something here. One of the major differences, you see that groove right there? That's called the grease groove. Now, the grease groove that Elmer Keith designed was more squared. And the reason is when you would put grease or lube in the grease groove, which helped it, go down the barrel, if this was square, the lube tended to stay put right there. So the lube's not falling out. It's going to stay right where you put it. Well, the drawback to that is when you're dropping your projectiles out of a mold, particularly if you're using like high-speed machinery and you're dropping molds, a lot of them real fast, that square bottom on the grease groove has a tendency to make the projectile stick in the mold. So a lot of them will stay true to form with the remainder of the projectile, but the bottom of the grease groove, instead of being square, they make it round. And not because it does any benefit like Elmer had in mind for making the grease stay where you put it, but it's to help them in the manufacturing process to prevent the bullets from sticking in the mold or reduce the propensity for them to stick in the mold and they'll just drop right out. Now above that, you have right there, that's called a crimp groove. So on a revolver, like 44 mag, you're rolling the mouth of the casing into that groove. If you have jacketed bullets or some plated bullets, they'll have a cannelure, so where you're pressing the mouth of the casing onto the cannelure. These had a crimp groove where you roll it in, and when you do that, if you're shooting that in a revolver, by the way, if you have the rolling of the mouth of the casing into the groove right there, if in a revolver you have on recoil, the gun goes rearward, the projectile now can pull out and protrude through the cylinder face. You don't want that to happen. If it's rolled in on the bottom portion of that crimp groove, the mouth of the casing is going to lay against that so it cannot pull out, because the mouth is kind of like doing this against it. Now, let's say conversely, you're going to shoot that out of a lever action rifle. On a lever action rifle, you have the opposite problem. Revolver, kinetic bullet puller. The case being lighter than the projectile, you get a rapid rearward movement of the firearm. The projectile can protrude out like a kinetic bullet puller, and it'll protrude through the cylinder face. On a lever gun, bang, the gun goes rearward, the spring tension in the tube magazine is taken up, and then the ammunition in the tube travels rearward. So you get this tick, 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 tick. Every cartridge that's waiting for the one ahead of it to move rearward gets hit by all of that weight. And that weight can push the projectile deeper into the case. You don't want that to happen. That's bad. So if you have a groove like this and you roll the mouth into it, if that bullet has a propensity to get shoved downward, the mouth of the casing is going to stop it from going any deeper. It stays exactly where you put it. The guy was smart in the way he designed what he was doing. But as you get deeper and deeper into this reloading book, there's great explanations about muzzle loading, the different rifling that's in the rifles, why there is this kind of rifling, why is there that kind of rifling. Some rifling prefers softer projectiles or material that will kind of conform down into the groove much easier, where some, if you have shallower rifling, do not go, they don't do real well with softer lead bullets. You need like a full metal jacket. Marlin micro groove is an example of a lever action rifle because the micro groove is shallow. They shoot jacketed bullets really well. Softer lead, they're just not going to do that well. So this is one example of how these older books really did a wonderful job and very concisely teaching you an enormous amount of information in one spot. And it was done in just a couple of pages. And they threw in really cool tips and tricks for the outdoor enthusiast, as we might like to say. Check that out. That guy's got everything he needs right there in the trunk of his car. Now, there's no reason you couldn't do a similar thing if you've got an SUV or even a pickup, drop the tailgate, and you've got everything right there. You know, guys would take everything they need out to the range and they would load, they'd shoot. You do your load development right there. If you got a place to do that, great. Well, if you're going to a public range, you can't necessarily back up to the spot that you're shooting, so it maybe isn't quite as practical. But if you are in a place where you can back up a vehicle to the spot where you're going to be shooting, you can do load development right there and you can do it in the back of your vehicle. How cool is that? Happy trails.